Good evening. My name is Marsha Hovey. I'm the Emergency Services Coordinator for the City of Cupertino, and I work for Santa Clara County Fire Department. This evening we're doing the first presentation, Pandemic Flu, What Should You Know? And hopefully be able to do more of them in the future as we get more information. I want to thank everyone that's here in the audience today. It's a good first step, being prepared and educating yourself on what you need to know for pandemic flu is really key, because once you have the information, then you know what you need to do and what just kind of becomes the hype of the day. I want to talk about the emergency procedures for this room. Even though we're talking about pandemic flu, earthquake is always a possibility. So if there is an earthquake while we're here, since we don't have tables to drop under, try to stay in your seat, cover your head the best you can, stay where you are. Panic kills more people than earthquakes do. And then when the ground stops shaking, we will exit out this exit or this one. I'll let you know which, depending on how safe it is, and we will convene out in the quad area so that everyone can make sure that everyone's okay. Before we look ahead to the potential of pandemics in the 21st century, I'm going to go back in time and show you a wonderful slide presentation that was put together by the New York Times. So let's start that video.
The 1918 flu epidemic was the worst infectious disease epidemic ever in recorded history. It's not entirely clear how many people actually died because many countries, including the United States, didn't keep good statistics. Estimates range from 20 million to more than 100 million people. But it was 25 times more deadly than normal influenza. And if such an epidemic came today, killing a similar number of Americans, 5 million Americans would die. And that's more than the number who were felled in a single year by heart disease, cancers, strokes, chronic pulmonary disease, AIDS, and Alzheimer's disease combined. This is Gina Colada for the New York Times. The 1918 flu struck with a vengeance. First there was no flu around, and then all of a sudden this flu was everywhere. It was spreading from place to place with a speed that nobody could imagine. It wasn't even clear how it was getting to some of the places it got to. And when the deaths started occurring, they really came fast. It came to Fort Devens in Massachusetts, about 30 miles west of Boston. On August 28, 1918, 8 men had the flu. The next day, 58 men were sick. By day 4, there were 81 sick people. A week later, it was 119 people who were sick. Pretty soon, people were dying, person after person after person. One doctor who was there at the time said that it was starting to take special trains just to carry away the dead. He said in the morning the dead bodies were stacked like cordwood. The scene in Fort Devens was of utter devastation, but pretty soon every city in the United States seemed to be struck by the flu, and so did the most remote areas, places in Alaska that you could only reach by dog sled. All of a sudden, villager after villager was dying of the flu. Ultimately, the flu had come to every corner of the world. There was only a couple places that had escaped, and that was because they really literally quarantined themselves. As the flu started spreading, almost every place where people knew the flu was coming tried to take precautions. Laws were passed saying people had to wear masks when they went out in public. Spitting was barred. Public gatherings were barred. Even the draft was canceled at one point. Supreme Court canceled one of its sessions instead of Congress. And then in places like Philadelphia, they did just what you would think would be the most reasonable thing to do. They said they were going to close the schools, they were going to close the churches, they were going to bar all crowds and public gatherings, and yet nothing seemed to really work. Within a month after the flu arrived in Philadelphia, nearly 11,000 people had died from the disease. One of the other things that was really unusual about the 1918 flu was that it was killing people between the ages of 20 and 40. Most flu viruses, in fact every other flu virus that's been known, kills the very young and the very old. It's really unclear what was going on. There are hypotheses, but because so little is known about what made that flu so deadly and what made that flu so infectious, the hypotheses are still just that, hypotheses.
Close this.
At the time, scientists were really baffled. They hadn't isolated a flu virus, and in fact, one common hypothesis was that the flu was actually caused by bacteria. Some people thought they'd even isolated the bacteria. Of course, they hadn't. No one really had any idea how to make a flu vaccine since they didn't know what a flu was. And it was because of some of this ignorance about influenza and about viruses that we knew so little for so long about the 1918 flu. But one remarkable researcher, Dr. Jeffrey Taubenberger at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, had an idea. He actually managed to find preserved lung tissue from 3 victims of that flu. 2 of them were soldiers who by coincidence had died on the same day. After autopsy, military doctors had taken little snips of their lungs and put them in formaldehyde, wrapped them in paraffin wax, and they just stored them. He dug them up and found that the flu virus was still there, broken into millions of pieces and deteriorated, but he decided maybe he could fish it out and figure out its sequence. The 3rd victim was a woman who was buried in the permafrost in Alaska, found by a pathologist who gave some of her lung tissue to Dr. Taubenberger, and sure enough, he could find the same flu virus, deteriorated once again, but still there in her lung tissue as well. It took 10 years because there was so little material to work with, but finally Dr. Taubenberger and his colleagues have actually reconstructed the sequence of the 1918 flu, which now allows people to start asking these questions. Is it different from the H5N1, the bird flu that's out there now? The answer is it is, but it was a bird flu. And then the next question is, what made it so deadly? And are any flus out there starting to acquire some of the things that made the 1918 flu so dangerous? Those are questions that are still unanswered. But at least with the 1918 flu, for the first time, people actually have a real sequence of a pandemic flu, and they can start to ask these really important scientific questions. For the New York Times, this is Gina Colada.
It's kind of scary, isn't it? That was 90 years ago. And there isn't a lot of documentation, as they said, on what happened or how we can prevent it. So that's what we're here tonight to do, is to talk about what we can do to keep this from happening again. I want to let you know that I'm not an expert on pandemic flu, and the information that I am presenting to you has come from 2 sources. One is the Santa Clara County Public Health Officer, Dr. Martin Fensterscheib. A large portion of the slides came directly from him. And then the other information is from a very good friend of mine who is a volunteer for the city, and her name is Pandemic Patty. I've nicknamed her that because she knows more about pandemic flu than anyone I've ever met. And she is my source of information on a day-to-day basis. She keeps track over the internet of all of the current events and advances and possible hopes in pandemic flu and gets them to me, so that what you're going to see this evening is the most current information available, and we'll continue to share that with you. And we're not going to put Pandemic Patty on camera this evening because she's a little shy. But you will be able to tap into her expertise, and I'll talk about that later, when you can actually send her emails through the Cupertino website and get your questions answered directly. The other person I want to point out in the room is Ken Erickson. Ken is the Citizen Corps Coordinator for the city, and Ken is in charge of all of the volunteer programs that we have. You'll see him later as he goes around the room. If any of you have questions during the evening, just raise your hand and he'll come around with the microphone. We do want to make sure you have the microphone so that the people at home can hear what you have to ask. All right. So why should we worry about pandemic influenza? It's been on the cover of every national magazine. It's been on every newspaper. They talk about it on the evening news almost every evening, but what's the big deal? It's not happening here, and it doesn't seem to be that bad, does it? Well, an influenza pandemics are inevitable. They are naturally occurring. There are naturally in the environment every 100 years several strains of new flu that no one has ever had before. And over the course of time, that just keeps happening. So the public health officer and those other experts around the world have decided that we can't act as if it's not going to happen again. The current strain of bird flu that is now out in the environment has a lot of potential. It looks a lot like the 1918 flu. And so this is a prime time to start preparing. It may not be the flu that turns into a pandemic, but what are we waiting for? And there will be little warning when it does happen. This is just a showing of the flight plans for one airline in one day. So you can imagine once something that's contagious hits the human population, how quickly it can spread and be worldwide. And you'll be happy to know that you're contagious with the flu 2 days before you show symptoms, which means that you could unknowingly infect people. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the difference. What is a seasonal flu? The seasonal flu is one that it affects the respiratory system of people, and we have vaccines. Every year vaccines are developed so that if we get our flu shots, we can reduce the spread. We don't get as sick. It doesn't impact the community. I don't even know that many people anymore that get the flu because we've gotten so good at getting our flu shots and being proactive that I wonder how many of you can remember the last time that you actually had a serious flu. I can remember way back being really sick, but not in the recent past. Now, the avian flu that we're reading about in the newspapers and hearing about on television is, they call it the bird flu. It's a virus and it affects birds. It is very contagious and it's killing thousands and thousands of birds. In fact, the countries where it's been detected are having to kill the birds to get them away to try to reduce the spread. And it doesn't normally affect people, but it can. And the people right now that are getting it, for the most part, are those who are working directly with those birds. So they're catching it from the bird, and that's the difference. When a person catches it from a person, then we're in trouble. But as long as we're staying away from those birds, we're doing better. Now, this strain of avian flu has not efficiently and sustainably passed yet from person to person. It has actually passed from one person to another, but it hasn't moved on to the third person. And when it does that, that's when it will start to rapidly spread. And this is how it spreads. So you see the bird there. It can actually go to human. It can infect humans two different ways. One is it can infect other animals first. And in fact, cats and dogs and tigers and ferrets have already gotten this avian flu. And when it passes through one of those animals, it can also infect a human. But it may be a less virulent strain at that point. It may not be as serious. But should it pass directly from the bird to the human and then from human to human, that's when it's the most powerful, and that's what happened in 1918. It's the same type of formula that's happening. So the pandemic is when it starts to pass from person to person. It causes serious illness. There is no cure. There is no vaccine because no one's ever seen it before. In the last 300 years, there have been 10 pandemics, by definition, 10 times that the flu has passed from human to human and there has been no vaccine. The average is every 24 years. You can see the three that we had in the 20th century. 1918 was the first, then 1957 and 1968 and 69. And on this slide, you see the death rate in the United States for those 3 flus. I remember, except for the 19, I remember people talking about the other 2. And as a child, I figure if they were talking about it, it must have been fairly serious for me to hear it enough times to remember it now. But you can see how much more serious that Spanish flu of 1918 was. Now, part of that could be because of advances in medicine. It's more likely that it was just not as powerful a strain of the virus. And so as I start to unveil this information to you, this is what it feels like to me. This is what it felt like the first time I started to hear the potential impact of a pandemic, is that it just keeps getting bigger. It's all under the surface. Now we could pretend that it's never going to happen here, but if we do, then we have all of that below the surface just waiting to take advantage of us. So we do need to be proactive. This is a slide of the mortality in the United States in the 20th century. So you can see the death rate in the United States overall declined from the 1900s through 1980 and beyond because of medical intervention and because there were advances in medicine. But the big spike obviously was in 1918 because this flu was there. And in 1918, of the people that died, you can see the spike. It says 5 to 14, and then it kind of tails off at 45 to 54. So this flu actually killed more people that were between 20 and 40 years old. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a little disturbing to me, mainly because you think that that's the strong part of the society. Why would they be the ones that were being impacted? I'm going to show you another little internet link here, if I can get it to come up. Well, maybe they moved it. All right, I'm not going to show you the internet link, but I'll just go on right to this one. So this is January 2008. This is the number of people that have died from the H5N1 virus. So this was either bird to human contact or human to human in the same family. That we're also very closely working with the birds, so it's hard to tell. Now so again, you can see that this new bird flu looks it's behaving a lot like the 1918 pandemic. It's killing the same age group. You can see that second column there, the 10 to 19, the 20 to 29, the 30 to 39. That's where it's hitting again. Now, why is it doing that? Well, it's doing that because their immune systems are strong. And this, you want to explain it, Patty? She's much better explaining it.
There's a medical term called cytokine storm, which refers to a massive reaction and, in fact, overreaction of an immune system. So what people speculate happened in 1918 and what has been observed to be happening with the younger age groups so far with H5N1 is that throughout their body, and most particularly in the lungs, where the virus settles and begins to attack cells inside of your lungs, the immune system begins to churn out and churn out and churn out and not turn itself off all of the elements that it can create to fight an invader. And when that continues to happen and the feedback loop to moderate doesn't work, and these immune system components continue to be put out and put out and put out, that makes a sort of a battleground of the lung tissues. And what happens out of that is a viral pneumonia that is very, very serious and fills up the lungs with fluid. And this tends to happen in people who have a really strong immune response. So as we age, each decade that we age, our immune response isn't as good as it used to be, right? So that's the theory about what may be going on here. Cytokine storm. You can look that up in any medical textbook and find out what it is.
And you can get more information. We've given you a handout, which we will also put up on the internet, of some really good resources, some of the best places on the internet that you can find information and books you can read. And so there is a book called The Pandemic Influenza. That is an excellent book that explains some of this type of behavior. Now, the World Health Organization, also known as WHO, are monitoring this very closely. They've created threat levels, just like Homeland Security, so that we can see the progress. Because there are 6, it doesn't mean that it couldn't go from 1 to 6 in a day. Because you see that you have evidence of increased human-to-human transmission, and then you've got significant increase, and then it's sustained and it's going from human to human. That could happen over the period of just a few days. So if we wait and watch the news and decide, well, we won't do anything until we see it get to level 4, you may not have enough time to do what you need to do to make sure that your family is safe. So let's bring this into Santa Clara County and talk about how the disease is spread. It's spread by close contact, by sneezing on people, by coughing. You can touch a surface, you cough on your hand, you touch a surface, someone else touches the surface, they put their hand to their mouth, and now they have the germ. In Santa Clara County, these are the estimates, and this is with doing nothing. And I want to stress that this is the worst case scenario, that if there was a major pandemic, that we would have 25 to 35% of our population ill. And that would be over the course of about 18 months. And of those, between 61,000 and 143,000 would need to be hospitalized. And of those, up to 22,000 could die. Those are huge numbers. And this is what our hospital system looks like in Santa Clara County. First, I want you to actually look at the top graph, at the bottom where there's a little yellow bar and it says illnesses, and watch how fast the disease spreads. The first week, 1,100 cases. The second week, 4,500 cases. The third week, 7,800. The fourth week, 11,000. It's just a germ. It passes from person to person. And in that same graph, you can see the red bar is the hospitalizations, and then the little black bar is deaths. Now, even though that little black bar, like on week 5 and 6, it's not very big, it's still almost 1,000 people a week. Our coroner's office is not really set up to manage that kind of death rate. So we have to do something to slow it down. Now, in the bottom graph, this is showing the available hospital beds in Santa Clara County. We don't usually have a lot of hospital beds available in Santa Clara County. They're all filled up. And so you can see that by the end of week 2, we're at a deficit. We have filled every bed in the county with sick people. And the intensive care beds also, now there aren't enough. And so what happens to the people in week 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that need hospitalization and there's no place to put them? And even though we're just looking at Santa Clara County right now, this is happening across the world. Every hospital bed is full. And again, this is over an 18-month period. So on the healthcare system here and around the world, we'll have staffing shortages, obviously, because the nursing staff and the doctors are sick too. They're part of that 35%. The supplies and equipment, antivirals, which is something that can slow the spread or it can reduce the effects of a flu, will be in short supply, probably none. And then ventilators, which is what's used for people that have pneumonia, have the respiratory complications. There are only a few in the county right now, and even though they're trying to buy more, it's not going to be enough to handle this surge of people. So the demand's going to outpace the supplies. It could last up to 2 years, 18 months to 2 years. And then the vaccine is not available, because until it hits human-to-human form, a vaccine can't be developed. Now that's the current statement. Scientists are trying to figure out a way to come up with something that will at least reduce the effect. But at this moment, if we plan for worst case, there is no vaccine for 6 to 8 months. So everyone that gets it in the first 6 to 8 months is going to have to go through the 2-week cycle of being sick. And then most of the people then, because the beds are all overwhelmed, are going to have to be taken care of in some other manner, hopefully at home. If you can keep people from having complications, you can care for them at home. But now the health officers around the world have come up with an intermediate level of care. They call it an influenza care center. It would look a lot like those old black and white pictures. Cot after cot after cot after cot of people that are sick. And they're there either because they lived alone, they had no one to care for them, and they're too weak to care for themselves, or they had some kind of a complication, but it wasn't quite to the level that they were able to take them to a hospital. So the prioritization of who's going to go to the hospital is going to get pretty defined. That you're only going to go if they think they can help you. So at the home care, you keep your person at home, you isolate them, so you're reducing the spread, and you're going to give them lots to drink, because that's what you do when you have the flu. You have to stay hydrated, and you want to give them some kind of an oral antibiotic, not for the flu, because an antibiotic is not going to stop the flu, but to stop the infection, the pneumonia. So that's what you would be doing at home. You could also give them over-the-counter medicines. Obviously, you're going to be fighting fevers. So you're going to continue to give them fever medication. You're going to give them maybe the same thing for pain, because, remember what the flu feels like? It's achy, and you're sore, and you're weak. And so you need to have all of those medicines on hand so that the flu doesn't get the best of you. You have to stay on top of it. And then the influenza care centers is the intermediate care. So they're going to have a few nurses and a few doctors there. We sure would like to have more. We're looking to the private practice community to come forward and identify themselves as potential helpers, medical volunteers. And then we would also use board and care homes, or I'm sorry, that's not true. What it would be is like a board and care. It would just be to help people that couldn't help themselves, or there was no one to help them at home. They would be hydrated, maybe intravenously. It depends on how many IVs we have available. And then oxygen, but no ventilators. So there's a little bit more capability there. Again, we're trying in this county to identify locations where we might be able to set up these centers, and they're pretty much big auditoriums, high school gyms, and those kind of places. It won't just be staffed by doctors and nurses. It's going to have to be staffed by community members as well, because when you have hundreds of people, you just can't keep overworking the doctors and nurses, and the level of treatment that's being given doesn't require their level of skill, so we can keep them for the hospital care. And then at the hospital, that's the most critical, the people that they're really trying to do something to intervene. They've got to put them on ventilators. They can do x-ray and lab work to make diagnosis, and that's how that cycle works. So your goal is to never have to go to an influenza care center. Your goal is to just ride it out at home. These are the planning assumptions then. This is not business as usual. This is a worldwide event. Nothing's going to look the same. Every time I imagine this, it just sounds like a science fiction movie to me. The whole society and the government's going to be involved. There won't be anybody to come and help because everyone's in the same boat. We're all fighting it together. It's going to be a long-term response, so we're going to get really tired. The people that are well are going to get very tired. And it's going to disrupt the workforce. If you have 35% of the people sick, who's going to be doing all the work? On the infrastructure, the state and federal governments have already told the locals, this will be your problem. We do not have the resources to come and help you, because they will be fighting the flu themselves with their staff. And so initially, probably the first 6 months until they can help get the vaccine available, no one will be coming to help. We're on our own with what we have here in our county, with what we've planned and what we've done in advance. The disruptions to transportation and commerce and utilities, public safety and communications it's not really that the infrastructure is going to break, but if it does break, they may not have the staff to fix it right away. So there could be disruptions while they're waiting for people to get well and get out of bed and come back to work and fix things. So there is a possibility that the utilities would be looking to the public for people with expertise that they could have come in and help to get things back up and running again. And then the final one, social distancing. Our public health officer, all health officers have the legal authority to prevent people from meeting. We couldn't have this meeting. You can't have a city council meeting. You can't have people in a room together because they can infect each other. And he has already guaranteed us in this county that the second that there's a case identified here, he will close all schools because children will pass it more than anyone else. And the schools could be closed for 6 weeks, 12 weeks at a time, and then a wave of the flu will go through, and then it will start again. So you may get to go to school for a little bit, maybe the teachers get well and some of the kids are well, and then another wave will hit and they'll have to close the schools again. Daycare centers will close, all public events will close. So I'm going to stop there for just a second, and these are big impacts to the community, and I just want to hear from the audience. And for this part, I'll repeat what you say so that Ken doesn't have to run around really fast. Let's say that the schools close today, and what would that mean to you?
Think about if you have any employees who are working for you or who are single parents. What happens to those employees when their children can't go to school or daycare? That impacts absenteeism also, even without anybody in that family being sick.
Okay, so then the parents would have to stay home to take care of the kids. What about the kids? There's no school, yay. Huh? No school, yay, for 6 weeks.
Yay, I can
high school seniors saying, am I going to graduate on time?
Mm-hmm. Or saying, oh, let's meet our friends at the mall.
Can't go to the mall. Better get a lot of games at the house. Nobody's going anywhere. Anybody have any other thoughts on that? Just schools can have a ripple effect on the whole community. If you have kids, just think about what that would do. When school takes a day off and you're still working, just that little disruption, imagine it for 6 weeks. And then at work, high absenteeism, 40%, maybe more, because of this impact that the schools closing will have. So they may not all be sick, but they may not be able to come in. And do the employers want to say, well, just bring your kids with you? No, because the kids might be sick. They just may not have symptoms yet. And huge psychological impacts, because the news is this is going to be on the news. It's going to look very scary, and people are going to be afraid. They may be afraid to leave their houses. You can be afraid, you just don't want to go outside because you're not sick right now, and doggone it, I'm not going to get sick. I'm going to stay here until it's over for 18 months. Say that again. It is the country's problem. It is absolutely the country's problem, but the country is us. And I'm going to give you some answers here. Changes in the workplace. Now, the employers also, because they're trying to protect those that are at work that are well, it's very likely that they will tell people, if you're sick, you stay home for 2 weeks. Your child is sick, don't come to work because you probably have been infected. You've been around the child before they were ill, and so now that causes a problem because they may not have enough sick leave to cover that. So there are a lot of policy decisions that are going to have to be made at the government level, at the business level, on what do we do if we're trying to preserve the public health. What do we do for people that can't afford to stay home? Okay, now that's with no intervention. So now here's some hope. Our goal is to delay this disease. We're going to delay its spread, and we can do that by using some very common sense, easy to implement procedures. And so you can see that the high peak there is without intervention. If we do nothing but watch the news, this is how bad it's going to get. But if we practice good hygiene and we stay on top of the flu and we stay away and we practice social distancing, we can slow it down. We can slow it down long enough to get more antivirals produced, and we can slow it down enough to get vaccines introduced so that we don't have as many people sick. And that's very doable. Here is a perfect example from 1918. In 1918, Philadelphia had 719 people per 100,000 die. They allowed large public gatherings, including a citywide parade in support of World War I, a bond drive. And so they let it go on as planned. And in 4 months, 12,000 people died in Philadelphia. At that same time in St. Louis, they had 347 people die per 100,000. They shut down and enforced closing of schools, churches, and gatherings. And you can see the difference in how many lives were saved just by people listening and being cautious. So what can first responders do? I'm not talking about police and fire. I'm talking about you. Because you are the people that are going to be there. We are the people that are going to be there when this starts to happen. You are first responders for any disaster. So you educate yourself and you stay informed and you limit the spread, and this is the first step. You're here and you're hearing it, and you go home and think about it and then ask questions. But you want to know how to isolate ill people in your house. How to do that without spreading it to everyone else in your family. And practice good hand hygiene and hand awareness. Now, this is huge. You have to start right now and teach all your kids right now. You wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap, or with a 60% alcohol-based hand cleaner like Purell all the time. If you touch something, you shake someone's hand, get out the Purell. And think about where your hands are. If you touch your face like I do, you have to start stopping that from happening, because you're going to feed yourself the germ eventually if you keep doing that. You're going to practice covering your coughs and your sneezes. I'm going to show a video in just a second on that. You're going to stay 3 to 5 feet away from other people. Why? Because when they sneeze, it doesn't spray that far. So you want to be far away from people that are sneezing or coughing. And when you're sick, stay home. So it's important that you know the fever is the clue. So as soon as you start to get a fever, you need to have a thermometer so that you can regularly check that, because you may not feel it when it starts to come on. But the second that you have a temperature, you've got to isolate yourself and stay home. Don't send your kids to school sick. Don't send them to daycare sick. And then get your flu shot, because you sure don't want to get one of the other flus and be in a weakened condition and then get this. And we don't want to get all paranoid because you got a flu and we think you have the bird flu, and no, it's just one of those strains that you could have been immunized for. Okay, so let's watch the video on proper hygiene.
Please take this opportunity to adjust the volume on your television set. Millions of disease-causing germs are launched into the atmosphere every time someone coughs or sneezes. It is customary to cough and sneeze into one's hands, supposedly to prevent the spread of germs. But germs get onto the cougher's hands and are spread to telephones and doorknobs, and from there they are spread to other people's hands and mouths, and who knows where else. The best place to cough is into fabric, such as one's sleeve, where germs are trapped while they desiccate and die. But people in polite society do not cough into their sleeves. Such behavior is frowned upon. The purpose of this video is to make coughing into one's sleeve fashionable and even patriotic. It's the right thing, the polite thing to do. You will now see 4 excellent, slightly different coughing techniques executed first into the right sleeve and then into the left. The technique will vary depending on your dimensions, the flexibility of your joints, whether you are wearing long or short sleeves, and your ability to cough at an angle. Notice the slight change of position during a sneeze, with the nose a little lower. You will now see a series of coughs and sneezes performed by random subjects. Their coughs will be judged by our panel of 3 infectious disease experts, Dr. Graham Stain, Dr. Blood Hagar, and Dr. Polymorph. First, the coughs.
That would be a 4.
That's a
the left
3.
hand was
Way too
needlessly
close to the
contaminated.
10. Perfect.
9.
Hand on opposite
Great.
shoulder creates a
And
mask
no
at the
talks
elbow.
about messing up
Ideal.
his beautiful suit.
4.7.
4.
He
The
should
elbow's a
cough
bad
into
Way
his
too
target
leaky at the
for
bicep.
people
elbow.
with long arms. 8.
7.6.
Easy.
I like
Practical.
Almost as good as the black suit guy.
Pathetic.
Awful, not fit for
0.
healthcare
Jeez,
field.
what planet did he come from?
Now, the sneezers.
2.
1.
He contaminated his
3.5.
hands.
Yuck. Why bother with the
Why do they always
Kleenex?
smile when they're finished?
That's a 1.
Her right
should go and
hand's
wash
more
her hands
dangerous than her left.
5.
5.2.
His hand got hit.
Impractical.
9. Wow,
9.
great germ
Great.
entrapment.
But
Nearly
they messed up
perfect.
their hair.
Who let him back in? Get that guy out of here.
Disgusting.
He doesn't rate the
Yuck.
time of day.
A perfect 10.
9.9.
What more
10.
can I say?
Awesome. She's the one to imitate.
We must train ourselves to cough into the nearest appropriate fabric, which is usually a sleeve. Most healthcare garments lend themselves well to this technique. Unfortunately, many street clothes do not. To avoid messes, we should formulate coughing strategies for the clothes and accessories we are wearing each day.
I could have saved my shirt if I did that first time.
Paper tissues are good cough receptacles when they are placed over the mouth properly, but using them usually results in hand contamination. They should not be reused. Handkerchiefs suffer from the same hand contamination and reuse problems, and they have the additional disadvantage of poor accessibility.
Achoo!
Ew! Ew!
From an infection control standpoint, the perfect answer would be an armband that could be changed after each use. However, society is not yet ready for such a radical change. So, in keeping with the recommendations of the Center for Disease Control, why don't we just do it in our sleeves? It's the right thing. It's the polite thing to do. And remember, if you make a mistake and cough or sneeze into your hands, please wash them immediately.
Now that video, it's been shown quite a bit on our city channel over the last few months, but on your resource list that we gave you in your handouts, it also shows where you can find it online, and it's free to view online. You can also purchase it if you like. I think it's about $15, but you can share it, email it to people. It's even though it's kind of funny, when you actually watch people cough and sneeze, it's pretty obvious that it's not effective. And so just start thinking about that and practicing better hygiene. The more that you are improving that trait now, the better off you're going to be when it really, really matters. But it's going to reduce the spread of germs now, too. There are germs now, too. A couple other things you can do that you should know about. One is that if in the event of a pandemic and people were isolated, the city does have its own radio station. It's 1670 AM, and we would continue to broadcast information, anything that you would need to know to try to give you some guidance. Offer suggestions on hygiene and suggestions on how to care for people at home, so that if your friends or relatives didn't get to come to this training this evening, that you could point them to that. Also, 1590 AM and 740 AM are our two backup stations. The whole world is going to be talking about this, but if you want to know Cupertino specific, 1670 AM. And then also our cable channel 26 would be putting information up, probably slides of things that you can do to minimize the situation. We also have a website, cupertino.org, and on that website, on the homepage, is a link that says emergency information, and that would be posted with businesses or services that were open, whether schools were open or closed. We would keep that up to date to let you know what the status of the city was. And then finally, our most recent acquisition is a telephone notification system that some of you may have experienced. We've sent out a couple of citywide telephone calls. So if you do get a phone call and it says stand by for an important message from the city of Cupertino, that's a real important message, and it's a way for us to communicate with you without having to be person to person. And so that's another way that we could send out warning and alert information to you for all kinds of emergencies. All right, so what kind of supplies do you need? This is an earthquake kit on steroids, because we're not talking about a 3-day supply now for survival. We're talking about at least 2 weeks. We're going to start with 2 weeks because you want to be able to stay in the house with your family if possible until you're well. But your goal is to plan for 3 months. Because of these waves of flu that happen, you want to try to be able to stay there for 3 months. Now, this is probably not going to be the most appetizing food, because you want something that's not perishable, it's going to last for a while and doesn't take up a lot of space. But a lot of dried foods, maybe beans, maybe rice, but you can think about that. I just want you to think about it now. So we're going to start with the food and water, and then you want your prescription medications, anything that you do take regularly. Try to keep a 2-week supply, because if the hospitals are overwhelmed and the pharmacies are overwhelmed, you may not be able to get your medicine as quickly. And do not run out of fever reducer. Keep it in stock all the time, because what do you suppose is going to happen to the grocery store shelves of all cold and flu medication once this hits. And truck drivers are not going to be driving around delivering to the grocery stores because they're all afraid to be out in this germ too. Rehydration for adults and kids. Pedialyte is listed here, which is a child's, it's a fluid that's got minerals in it, because if you're vomiting and you have diarrhea, which this flu will cause, you want to make sure that you're replenishing those minerals in your body. And then for adults, Gatorade works really well. And then there are homegrown solutions. We put actually in your handout, there's a list of how to make a home hydration solution. Cell phone and charger, you do want to be able to communicate. I don't know what will happen to the landline systems. You know, anything can break, and if they don't have people to work on them, then your home phone may not work, or the power could go out. So if you have cordless phones, it's possible that you wouldn't be able to use them if the power has gone out and they don't have anyone to repair the transformer that blew for an extended period of time. So it's always good to have backup communication. Face masks and gloves and disinfectant. So I'm going to walk over here now. And I'm actually going to also put up a slide of some supplies. And is there anything here that you don't understand, or anything that you see in the slide that you don't quite see what the application would be? Because this is a good time to understand why they're important. Because up on the slide, that's the minimum. That's what I bought my children. That was what they got. Their most recent gift was a pandemic flu supply kit. Yes, they think their mother is crazy, but maybe not. One of the things that I like to point out, and this is Pandemic Patty's kit, and it's very good, very good. This is actually an herbal remedy, and I pick it up only because there are certain things that you have found over the course of your life that are your home remedies, the things that help you feel good during a flu. And I really recommend that you keep those on hand. So this is just any home remedy that I just wanted to remind you of. Make sure that all of your pills, write an expiration date, or write the day you purchased it and then check again in a year or so. But just don't let them expire, because they're not going to do you any good that way either. The masks here, we're actually going to give everyone that came this evening a mask, just to remind you to get started. They look like this. And it has a little N95 on the side that tells you that this is it will protect you from the sneezing and the coughing. And you want to put this on the sick person too. These will probably run out. I'm guessing that these will also be off the shelves. So the second best mask is the one that you see up on the slide, the one that's a medical mask. It looks like a surgical mask. So you want to have those. And then of the N95s, this one that has the little valve on the front, it's a little bit more comfortable to wear because it allows filtered air to come in and out, where the one without the valve, it gets a little steamy in here. And if you're sick, you're probably not going to be real thrilled about having this thing on your face. Gloves. You want to make sure that you're practicing really good sanitation at home, so you want to have medical gloves. And let's see, what else do we have? The propanes here could be in your earthquake kit too, because if the power's out, you may want to be able to still heat up some food. So if you have camping equipment or a camp stove, that's good. You need to have bleach, because we have to kill the germs. And so when you have somebody in the house that's ill, you want to make sure that all surfaces get disinfected. You wash their clothes, you wash the sheets, and let me see, what else? You can see in the slide there's a spray bottle, and it's 10% bleach to water. So it's, if it was 10 ounces of water, 1 ounce would be bleach. Okay? And that's enough bleach to be the disinfectant. So the best thing to do for the care of someone in your home is to put them in a room with hardly any furniture or stuff in it, because everything that's in the room with them needs to be disinfected. So Just make that look like a hospital room. Maybe there's a little tray there and the bed, and that's it. Our public health office in Santa Clara County has some places that you can go to get information. This is listed on your resource list, so you don't have to write it down. But the publichealth.org is their website. And then they have a hotline, and it's a recording, so you have to leave a message and they'll call you back. They don't have 24-hour staffing, but there is a hotline where you can get your questions answered. And we're also giving you today, they're out in the lobby, the pandemic, preparing for the pandemic flu. That was a guide that our health department created. It's pretty comprehensive, and it's actually been copied by a lot of the rest of the country because we did it first. One of the things that it doesn't talk about, though, it talks about having 2 weeks of supplies, dried beans and rice and things that you would think might be in an earthquake kit. What it doesn't remind you to do is make sure that you have all those home remedies and the things to get you through the flu. You do not want to eat beans or rice if you've had diarrhea and vomiting for 3 weeks, 2 weeks. So what do you eat? What should be in your kit? Soup, liquids, Jell-O, chicken soup, anything that's easy on the stomach, maybe some crackers, because you're going to have to start, getting yourself back used to eating. So keep those are going to all go off the shelves in the store too. So just get them and eat them and keep doing that. On your resource kit, again, we've picked out, or on your resource list, we've picked out the best of the best. The very first website that's listed is called getpandemicready.org. Pandemic Patty actually helped design it. It's the most easy to look at that I found, and it's just very down to earth, easy to understand, easy to navigate. So I really recommend that you look at that. And that resource sheet also lists videos, not only the Why Don't We Do It in Our Sleeves, but one that's done by the Red Cross and a couple others that we thought would be interesting, a list of books, and the Access Cupertino information. So Access Cupertino is on the Cupertino.org website. Right from Cupertino.org, you click on Access Cupertino, you log in. So you have to come up with a password and a username. But this is the same place that you go to complain about anything in the city or to praise anything in the city. So it's not bad to be registered there. You can do an anonymous posting, but you're not going to get an answer. So you can tell your feelings to the city, but you're not ever going to hear anything about it. But if you log in, there under the city managers section, it says, Ask Pandemic Patty, and you can put any question in there, doesn't matter what it is, or any suggestion in there, and we can get it to Patty, and she will research it and get the information back to you so that we can, do whatever we can to help you get prepared. So the last thing we're going to cover is the symptoms and care of someone with the flu, and we'll go through this pretty fast. These are flu symptoms listed here. So and the fever is, again, the big clue. If you have a fever and any of these other symptoms, you are now in battle mode. You have to start fighting to stay as well as you possibly can, to reduce complications. You cannot get complications unless you are the first person to get sick, and then you can go to the hospital. But everyone else is going to end up being at home. So you have to have complete rest. Your body has to fight, so you can't keep caring for the family. You're not going to go to work. You're not keeping the house clean. You're lying down, resting, drinking fluids, and taking something to keep the fever down. Don't let the fever go up. And again, antibiotics are not going to cure this. We have information available on how to, again, make rehydration solutions that you don't have to buy, but it is easy to buy them, and they last a pretty long time. The person should wear a mask. You should wear a mask. You wear gloves, washing your hands before and after you care for the person, and then cleaning the surfaces, everything, with the bleach and water. Doorknobs, refrigerators, cabinets, faucets, light switches, toilet seats, everything has to be wiped off. The germ can stay on a surface alive as long as the moisture is there. So it might take 5 minutes, it might take 10 minutes, and if there's any other moisture on the surface, it can stay alive longer. And your cleaning supplies, again, lots of hot water and soap and bleach and paper towels and plastic bags, because anything that you clean with in this room, you want to make sure it doesn't get into anything else in your house. So all of the Kleenex and the paper towels need to go in a bag and sealed to be properly disposed of. Make sure you've got Kleenex. And the disposable gloves aren't very expensive. These masks aren't very expensive, a couple dollars. You can get 100 gloves for less than $10. And then to help the community. After you get over the flu, and I expect everyone in this room will survive the flu, you are immune. You can't get it again, and you become golden to your community because you're invincible. You can walk out, people can sneeze on you, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get it again. Which means that as you're watching, how sad it is in the community that, people can't get out of their houses and they didn't have enough food, and there are a lot of people that can't afford to stock a lot of food. So someone's got to take that to them. If we ask somebody that hasn't had the flu yet to please go take this food over to the people's house that everyone's sick, well, maybe they'll drop it on the front door and run. But after a while, we need somebody that can go in and give a little care or come to the Influenza Care Center. You can help your family, you can help your friends. So that's huge, that once you're over it, you're over it. And then you can help the rest of us get over it. Communications, again, we don't know what our communication system is going to be like. So even just passing out flyers or distributing information, public information, garbage collection. If the garbage company is not able to function because the staff are all sick, we can't leave our garbage there. So we're going to have to think of something. And the city, we have some staff, but it may be a community effort. There'll be a lot of pulling together. I don't want this to happen, but I think we would be a better place when it was done because we all got through it together. Translation's going to be huge because we have a population that continues to come in and out, and not everyone speaks English when they get here, and we want to make sure that nobody doesn't get the information that they need. So my challenge to you is to ask questions. Ask questions now that you know. Ask the schools what their plans are. How are they going to continue to educate your kids while they're closed? Ask your employers what their plans are. Ask the government what the plans are. And you can ask Patty Pandemic. It's important that you ask the questions, though, because there are a lot of competing priorities out there. And this still is a little bit remote. So the more questions you ask, the more likely it is that you're going to get answers. So in closing, this is just a nice quote that I found from the World Health Organization. This is the first time in history that we are actually smart enough to plan this in advance. And we can make a difference. We can change the look of that curve so that we can get through it. And I don't know when it's going to happen. I encourage you not to wait. And I'm opening the floor up to any questions before we close for the evening. Questions? It's like drinking out of a fire hydrant, isn't it? Whew, that's a lot of information. Ken, up front here.
I was just going to ask about the slides. Are they on?
The slides are not online. I will put them online. We're going to try. I'll put them up just like they are, but we're going to try to put a narrative over them as well.
How long can you expect a bout of the flu to last?
The flu will last 2 weeks. You'll be sicker than a dog for about 2 weeks, and then maybe another 2 weeks to get your strength back. So it's a battle, and you really have to don't let the fever get a hold of you, and don't get the respiratory problems. So you got to make sure that you've got decongestants and things so that you can keep from having fluid buildup.
So after you are cured, or after you get over the influenza, are you still a carrier, or are you, so you don't, if you sneeze on somebody else, that virus is not in your system anymore?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's no longer in your system. You are our favorite person in the whole world.
Just for this season, right?
No.
Is this a season?
No.
I mean,
No.
the flu always have a new bug, right?
Seasonal flu has a season, which is usually during the cold months, right? So the winter in the northern hemisphere, which is the opposite in the southern hemisphere, right?
Yeah.
Pandemic flu of a new virus that appears on the global scene does not know about calendars and seasons. It's quite possible for a pandemic to start in May and continue to build through summer months. Pandemic flu is a horse of a different color. This was also true in 1918 with the severe pandemic that happened then. There was one wave of the flu in the spring of 1918 from March through May. Then it seemed to disappear during the summer months or not be so active in the northern hemisphere, okay? Then, the end of August, it appeared again. And all through September and building into the first weeks of October, it raged. And that was the deadliest wave of that pandemic, okay? Then, by November, for most of the country and most of the countries in the world, in our northern hemisphere, it went away, and it came back again in the spring of 1919. So there were 3 distinct waves, none of them during the winter.
Then how can we get a flu shot?
For a pandemic influenza, you will need to wait until a vaccination can be developed, manufactured, and distributed. And when it begins to be distributed, after about 5 or 6 months after pandemic has begun, there will be very clear priority guidelines for who gets vaccination first. Because they're not going to make 300 million doses all coming off the manufacturing line the same day, right?
Yeah.
So there will be very clear guidelines coming out from the federal government about who, and you can imagine who gets them first. Healthcare workers,
Senior.
firefighters, law enforcement people, military, political leaders that we need to still have a functioning government for, okay? So if I'm not in any of those categories, I'm coming farther down the list. Utility workers, I hope, get the vaccine before I do, because I really like my electricity, you know? And so there will be occupational groups that will be at the front of the line for the vaccine, as well they should be, because it's their job to protect everybody else.
And
So I personally, if this pandemic were to take off tomorrow, for me personally and my family, since we don't have healthcare workers or utility workers or military people or anything like that in my family, I would not expect a vaccine for me and my children until minimum 8 months after pandemic starts, maybe as long as 1 year. That's very possible with current vaccine technology. Okay, the way things are today.
And there's something else that we really didn't touch on, an antiviral. Now, antivirals are something that can actually prevent you from getting the flu. And it will minimize the effects if you get it within the first 24 hours of symptoms. But no one will prescribe them ahead of time. And again, they're going to be prioritized. The use of them will get prioritized just like the vaccine. So there is some hope there that as the government is getting more educated to the value of the antivirals, that they will come up with some plans to have a sustained supply to at least get the people that are sick for the first 6 months through it with minimal effects, and that also will reduce the effects. Any other questions? Thank you so much for coming, and we just stay in touch. I left you with an evaluation sheet to get a little bit more information. We are planning to do some focus groups to talk about specific issues on how to reach the community and how to think through some of these prioritizations to give some guidance. We don't have all the answers yet, and we sure could use some other great minds working on this subject. So thank you again, and I hope to talk to you under very pleasant circumstances next time. Thanks.